I was asked to speak primarily due to the vast amount of experience that I had the opportunity to observe as part of the Smithfield transition to group Sow housing. So I was really asked to give maybe more practical considerations. I've got a couple of slides that probably we use to look at in evaluating how we set up some of those systems, but this will be probably much more of a practical talk than more of a scientific and theoretical talk. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about group housing options and some considerations for each, some of the things that we looked at as we were doing our research into which sort of group housing system we were going to adopt. And then we'll talk about some practical considerations for breeding, feeding, management of groupings, including when to make groups, how big the groups are, vaccinations, and some other management keys. So I thought I'd start this out a little bit with my previous boss and one of my mentors, really, for my career, Steve Pullman, and his famous quote in dealing with Sow housing as he's now in the retirement stage of his life. He said, well, I spent the first 5 years of my career. He was a grad student and extension specialist for a while. He spent the first 5 years of his career taking sows out of pens and putting them in stalls, and now I'm going to spend the last 5 of my career taking them back out. So just to kind of give you some perspective, and for us, we looked at it to say, hey, a management decision had been made. We could and we did during that time have a lot of debate about is this the right thing to do or not to do. It probably has a lot to do with some misalignment between us trained as animal scientists and veterinarians and what the public perception is when they anthropomorphize what happens to pigs, right? They don't really have the background about what their real nature and behavior is. They're saying, well, geez, I would really be distraught if my pet couldn't turn around, right? So that's where a lot of this comes in. It's just a misalignment that we looked at it to say, well, once the decision was made, it's made. Now our job is to look at it and say, well, how are we going to research, find the best system to adopt as we moved into the group Sow housing options. Dr. Ganyu, as this whole thing was being set up in the early 2000s, did a really nice job. What were some of the ultimate goals of gestation housing, just thinking about, so whether they're in pens or whether they're in stalls, what are the things that we're trying to do? Obviously, the biggest thing is protection from the environment, protection from other sows due to, pigs can be fairly aggressive. So we need to try to protect them. How do we feed them? How do we breed them? And then how do we maintain that pregnancy and their well-being? And how do we create a safe and enjoyable workplace and a robust system to avoid management errors? So as we were looking through doing the evaluations of the 3 different typings, these were some of the things that we were trying to evaluate to come up with a decision. Dr. Brian Burr here at the University of Minnesota, and the references there on the bottom. It's a really nice article. It's a long one, a 75-page article, and tried to boil it down to say, well, what are the primary considerations for group Sow housing? And really, he kind of boiled it down to 4. It was, well, how much space do you need? What's the floor allocation that you need for each of your females in a group Sow housing system? What are the feeding strategies that we're going to use to control variation in sow condition? Because as we really all had enjoyed, one of the benefits of moving them into individual animal housing and stalls was, hey, if she's too fat, we can restrict her feed a little bit. If she's too thin, we can feed her a little bit more. So we could really tailor the feeding to what the specific needs were of the sow. We're going to lose some of that here, so we got to look at strategies to minimize that amount of variation that can inherently happen. And then really, plans for managing sows and dynamic or static groups, as Jennifer talked about. How and when to mix sows. Generally, as she mentioned, most of them are bred in stalls past the point where we can protect the embryos. That's somewhere in that 10 to 30 day range, the first 4 weeks there before we move them into the group housing situation. And then the 4th thing is really the stock person's skills and ability. They're going to be different than what many of us have probably grown up and trained on as far as how to manage animals in an individual animal unit like a stall, or to manage them as a group in pens. So group Sow housing, really, and Jennifer mentioned it before, there's really no one design that fits them all. This is the blueprint, and everybody should adopt it because it's certainly the best. And I think a lot of that really has to do with the facilities. A lot of it's going to be dependent on the facilities. It's going to be dependent on the cost, the expertise of the management, and even of the slat level workers. Those are all things that you have to consider, and when you look at each of these different housing options, because some of them are much easier to manage than others for people who don't have a lot of technological experience. I've been in some of those ESF systems, and they're very good, but to put that into practical production, you're going to have somebody who's a little bit of technology savvy to be able to efficiently run that. So you've got to look at, as you're trying to make that decision for your individual operation or your system, you're going to have to look at things like that. So the three options that we really spent a lot of time looking at were three of them. There were free access pens, electronic sow feeding, and group housing with drop feeding, or the trickle drop feeding small pen scenario. So we spent a lot of time. We'd sent a team over to spend time with the Danes, because they had probably had the most experience anywhere in the different housing systems that they had. And as we did our surveys, it was really quick to understand that there was definitely no one certain template that everybody was going to use. This was provided by Dr. Hansen with the Ag and Food Council. And at that time, they said, well, we've got about 30 to 40% of them in electronic sow feeding. We've got another 30 to 40% in free access, and we probably got 20 to 30% of them in pens. So we tried to spend some time visiting each of those different operations, talking to the people, trying to get some background on those different situations, what the pros and cons were, what we had to learn in order to help make our decision. There's actually some of the group Sow Housing video clips were put together by our team here at Murphy Brown, now all being kind of put underneath the Smithfield Foods umbrella. But if you go to youtube.com and Google "taking the mysteries out of pork production," there's several nice, really well done videos in there that kind of explain some of the decisions that we made and why we think that's it's worked well for us, and give you some different examples of what they are. So just a plug for that if you guys wanted to download and get some more information on that. So I would just go to YouTube and Google "taking the mystery out of pork production," and you should be able to see that in more detail. So some of the universal questions that we quickly arrived at in trying to decide between those three, it seemed to kind of be three of them. It's how much space do you need? When should we move them into groups? How do I feed them to ensure body condition? So we did a fair amount of literature review. We spent a lot of time with the people in Denmark trying to get to some of that information. And what we looked at from the space allowance standpoint, there's a fair amount of literature out there looking at different ranges, some down to less than 15 square foot a sow, some up to well over 50 square foot per sow, and it was kind of like those were the two tails of the range in the truest sense. And it was pretty clear that anything 15 square feet or less was going to clearly compromise animal well-being and performance as well. And then anything that looked like over 25 square feet didn't look like it gave a whole lot of additional advantages, whether it was to animal well-being measurements or production performance differences. The problem with that is there's not a lot of research done at the 15 to 25 square feet range, which is really where a lot of these systems really shake out at, as well as is 15 versus 18 versus 21 versus 24. Is there a lot of difference in between them or not? Just really hasn't been a lot of work done on it that's been published. So the European guidelines here, and I'll show you a slide here. It's a little bit flexible depending on group size, but roughly it appears to be about 17 square feet for gilts and about 24 square feet per sows. That's what the proposed minimum were for all the animal well-being regulations over there. This slide was adapted from some of that. Gives you a little bit more idea, depending on the group size, what the total square footage area was, and the area of solid flooring as well. But really kind of the takeaway there was that's where we kind of come up with the range here. If you look at, you're kind of in that 16 to 26, 27 square footage range. And those guidelines are a little bit flexible based on age of the female, the number per pen, and then the amount of solid flooring as well. There's a beautiful long European code document if you ever need some good late night reading that goes into great detail explaining all this and all the different regulations. But that was probably the snippet piece that we pulled out of it and trying to help answer that question. What about breeding and stalls and moving? And really we looked at it to say, well, there's well-being for the sow, but there's really well-being for her unborn litter as well. So we were looking at that primary animal welfare concern for all those unborn embryos, and really Jennifer did a nice job of explaining that first 4 weeks. If you look at over here, it's probably a little bit small. You kind of got the different stages here: estrus, ovulation, fertilization, uterine entry. You're probably okay moving sows here. I know there's been a bunch of work done, and the real thing that to really be concerned about is that 10 to 40 days here where you've got maternal recognition and then those embryos are actually implanting. So that was certainly the time period that we wanted to stay away from. EU regulations also in that document state that bred females are allowed to be in crates until 28 days of gestation. So we looked at that. We had some data. We did a little bit of research too, and we got I know there's more systems out there using that 35 to 42. We kind of settled on 42 based on some internal research and production data mining that we do, that we wanted to get through 2 estrus cycles and a pregnancy diagnosis that way before we're going to move them into groups. Here's some work done by Dr. Knox in Illinois, just looking at, in a study that he did with some National Pork Board funding, looking at different mixing. So I was certainly interested in looking at some of Jennifer's work there. And there they didn't mix them at weaning. Here they mixed them at day 3, day 14, day 35, and then compared it to just the conventional animal that would have stayed in the stall. And here it looked like the further you got out, the safer you were from a conception rate standpoint. So going into a little bit of each of the 3 different systems that we looked at, we've got the free access gestation pens. The thing that was really appealing to us, and I've got some video and some pictures I'll share, is the animals get to choose whether they want to lay in pens or they want to lay in stalls. So my question to you is, take a guess where they want to lay, and then we'll go through some of the slides, and then you tell me where you think that they want to lay. There's a little bit more square footage available for the animals, so there's which is good. I mean, we felt like that was that was going to help maintain our current levels of performance. Obviously, that comes with a little bit of cost too. So, and depending on the facilities that we were trying to retrofit, that gets to be a balance. The animals eat and drink in the crates. They can choose to move around or socialize. You've got solid floor loafing areas, and from a management standpoint, the crates are lockable. And I'll show you a couple pictures of that, and we can talk about why that can be a good thing as well. Here's just a picture of some bred sows in the free access pen. Now remember, this is coming into a pen. They get to choose where they want to lay. So as this shot was taken in the middle of the day, that's just one part of one pen. That's where they were all choosing to lay. Some of the retrofit pictures here you can see. Here's your traditional breeding and gestation barn, multiple rows of gestation stalls. That's before. And then after the conversion, that's kind of what it looks like. So there you see again. Oh, there's a couple of sows that want to lay out there, I guess. There's a couple of them there, but the majority of them continue to choose to lay in the individual stalls. But they have a choice, right? I mean, that's the thing. They can choose to lay individually, or they can choose to lay in as a group together. Here's some of the different lockdown mechanisms in the group housing. And really, that got to be beneficial as if you had an animal that you felt like you couldn't maintain her body weight adequately, either too thin or too fat, or if it's an animal that needed to be treated, or during a vaccination time, you had the ability to lock them down, do whatever procedures you needed to do until that animal was in a good enough position to be released back into the rest of that pen. Now, of course, the danger with that is okay, yeah, we're doing group housing. Let's put them in there and just lock them all up and keep them locked up all the time. So there was certainly a bit of management training that had to go along with that, but certainly was a nice tool for that, in that if they needed to be individualized and kept safe, we had the ability to do that. We also looked at small pen conversions, and we actually Smithfield's done a little bit of both, once again depending on facilities and things like that. Those are probably the simplest and easiest to do. Generally they're done by cutting the last 2/3 of the gestation stall off and creating pens of either 6 or 10. So you either got 3 stalls back to back, so that was your 6 per pen, or you had 5 stalls back to back, more of a 10 per pen configuration. So here's a picture just kind of a couple of butt-to-butt gestation stalls here. You got your feeders up front. So they really just came in here, and we did some research looking at 18 inches or I think 2 feet or 4 feet. We've had done several different models, but you can see where they just came in and essentially cut those off. So you still got your individualized feeding station, but now they've got all the ability to roam after that. Here's just some pictures of some barns being retrofitted. Probably doesn't show up as well here with the lighting, but you can see they're just cutting them off and installing some of the panels and gating that goes along with it. There's what it looks like when you're done with it. Here, these were some of the shorter ones. I think these were some of the ones that were only 18 inches of the original stall left at the head gate there. But in order to create these pens, we'd have just really long single gates. And what we saw were we'd put the animals in there, and some of these really long gates were bending from the stress of, sows still like to lay together, so you'd have 6 animals lay. They'd put a lot of pressure on these 9-foot long gates. 9-foot wide gates like that, are too heavy. They're pretty heavy. They're built all with cast iron, painted over. A little bit heavy for employees to lift by themselves. So that got to be a concern. The 2 feet of solid concrete was a little bit small for some of the feed drops. We had feed rolling in the pit and being wasted. And then the 18-inch wide quarter stalls at the head gate there seemed a bit too narrow. But experience has shown that it does allow 6 sows to stand side by side at feeding time. Still like to kind of eat as a group. So here's some of those original design issues there. You can see on some of these end gates here, we've got these 9-foot long gates, and you can see where they're starting to buckle here with these 2 big old girls laying on them. So that was resulting in some bent gates and some issues there. We actually looked at, as we got better and got smarter and did more of these retrofit, we kind of moved more to what we kind of called the 19.2 square feet, and these got to be called, I guess, the cutoff crates. That was probably the other word. It's kind of these simple, easier, small pen configurations. So really what we had was 12 2x7 stalls with a 2-foot walkway that created a pen that was 12 by 16 or 192 square feet. So you got 10 pigs in this pen that got just about 19.2 square feet and met all of our intentions of the Group Sow Housing Initiative. Got some pictures of that. So here you got just kind of an overhead diagram here. Here's your breeding and gestation. Here you got your you got 8 rows there of the 7x6 stalls. So when you come in and do that, you really just kind of cutting those end of those stalls out. And I'll show you a picture here in a moment to describe what's going on here in the middle. So here's a look. Here's a B&G barn before, kind of that traditional stall setup in a breeding and gestation barn. So what you can see here is we came in, we cut them off. Instead of putting one single gate here, you can see as we put 2 smaller gates. And then as well, we put a couple of posts here. And the really neat part about that here is, I'll show you in a second, is it was getting to be difficult. That we said those gates are really heavy to lift in and out. So also meant we had issues with potential worker safety by having either to lift them in or out or crawl over them to get in and out of those pens. So we created really kind of a walk-through alley, very similar to what you might see in a boar stud or an AI center, to kind of escape those collection pens. We just created walkways all the way down the alley. And what you can see here, so here we cut those off, got the gates, and here you can see the 2 posts, and you just got a walkway that too narrow for any sows or gilts to get through, but works perfectly well for most of our staff. And then what we did is we just put these drop waters in there, just pretty cheap, easy to install nipple waters in the middle of those pens. All right, so one thing that on one of the farms that we did some research on, we took a 2,400 sow farm and we retrofitted half the farm into small pens and half the stalls or the pens into free access systems. So I had somebody shoot this because as I went, one of the first times I went through it, I was just really surprised by the difference in behaviors. So we'll go ahead and just let this play here. Let me see if I can turn up the volume here. All right. Volume's not absolutely necessary, but what you can see there is she's walking through there. Probably the thing you can't appreciate is how quiet it is. You know, she's walking through there. You've got the sows. They're coming up to her. They're engaging her. You know, she's patting a few of them on the back. You know, she's walking through there without any issues at all. No fear from the sow standpoint. It's just pretty calm. Now here's going through the small pen barn. And here it's just kind of interesting, right? I mean, she's getting them up, but they're not up walking around. They're not really engaging her. They're kind of staying away. Doesn't appreciate in this video as much, but the very first time I went in, they're like, as soon as somebody walked through there, they're like, they took off and they were out to the outsides of those pens. Now, you can argue that's probably not just a fault of the design style. There probably people weren't interacting enough with them as well, but you know, on this farm you had the same people working in all those barns. So I just was kind of like a good on-site test. You had your treatment and control in the same building, same staff, same sows, everything. So it was really just interesting to see the difference in behaviors between the two. Real quick, just here's a picture of the automated feeder there for the ESF system. There's one of the pens. You can see they've got lying areas. The pigs still like to lay with their backs up against something, so you got all these different lying areas along with the feeder. Some of the things that we looked at, we did have one ESF system that we acquired, and as we were going through it, you know, there were just some things that really stood out to us. One is it was really critical for that system to be successful that a standard set of work instructions were in place. And then probably more important was just to have somebody third party to the farm, or at least the farm manager, if not somebody third party to the farm, doing audits consistently to make sure that the protocols were put into place were being followed. Startup training on the ESF farms is critical, and leadership must really be engaged to make that system successful. It's going to, as I mentioned before, it's going to require some technical aptitude by the farm manager or the maintenance person on the farm if the farm is big enough to be able to manage that system. Jennifer said, there's, you know, it's got some good abilities to collect some neat information, but you know, it's a piece of technology that most people aren't used to dealing with or how to troubleshoot. You know, they should try to be standardized across the system to reduce the amount of variation and the time allowed for the sow to eat. That's critical. And then I think we were probably counting on leveraging a lot of manufacturer distributor for technical knowledge or recommendations. So a lot of it was trial by doing in the truest sense. Some of the things that we've seen in that pod of farms there, comparing the ESF gestation to stalled gestation, there was a little bit of a difference. Not probably a terribly big sample size, so can't even say that's statistically significant at all. But certainly during the conversion times, we had some loss in reproductive performance, and we had the potential for seeing an increased aggression to the feeder, especially if we didn't have the time set right, so we made sure that the pigs got enough truly to satiate themselves. Here was a study done here actually at the University of Minnesota at the Waseca station, comparing stalls to ESF, and this was a little bit of the data that we looked at and when we were trying to prepare to make our decision. And you can see here we probably just didn't wean as many pigs out of that system. There's about 200 females in each of these treatments, same deal. They had part of the farm in stalls, part of it in the ESF system. And then our retention of those sows those gilts getting to 3 litters appeared to be a little bit lower in ESF systems as well. So that was, like I said, we acquired one to get some experience, but we just felt for some of those additional management things that it just wasn't going to be a system we're going to be very successful in. So we kind of came up with this matrix and grid based on all the research that we did. There you can see, you know, for each of them, like free access, ease of management was excellent. Electronic feeders, we already mentioned, that was probably going to be poor due to all the technological competencies we'd need to have. So just a different way that we kind of used to evaluate some of those different options. And like I said, we probably primarily went to doing some free access and some trickle drop feeding and didn't really do much more on the electronic sow feeding. So what were some of the challenges and lessons learned? Probably one was during the retrofit standpoint, the animal movement working around pigs. The biosecurity protocols, while they're under construction, probably really was a potential for a lot of questions, a lot of anxiety, a lot of disagreements between the people there to do the conversions and the people trying to take care of the pigs at the same time. So having a good solid protocol while you're going under construction, and then really a lot of it is getting those groups together and then reviewing that, with the construction staff. A big one was the construction equipment in and out of barns. Eventually we got to a point where we would turn over a barn, and then we'd let them open up part of the barn at the end to bring equipment in and out of there, and we just shut the doors on that barn. So and then we just tried to do as much education as we could with the farm staff and with the construction staff about, here's what you own, here's what we own, you don't cross here. If you do, you're going to need to get the manager's permission, and the veterinarian needs to be engaged along with that. So the establishment of the clean, dirty lines is really, really important. And then just having a way to have communication between the contractors and farm staff, because you have all the contractors, if they're doing any retrofit in there with the pig still in there, they're having to shower in and shower out. And how do you figure out the logistics? Do I have enough clothes? Do I have enough hot water to shower all those people in and shower all of my people in to do their daily work too? So staggering shifts. But a lot of that can be taken care of as long as you just have frequent interactions, lots of meetings on that as well. From a grouping sows standpoint, we made that election because of some of that data and experiences other had to wait to 35 to 42 days. And really just echoing what Jennifer's research to show, grouping them by body size, big sow, we probably went more by size even than with parity. Big sows with big sows, medium sows with medium sows, small sows with small sows, and then trying to keep the gilts together. We were going to be way more successful in those situations where we could do that. As we mentioned before, it's really easy to overfeed sows in these situations, so it's very important to have a pen card ID and a body condition score that gets checked multiple times during gestation. That's somebody's job, is they're going through and assessing that and then writing that down so that people can track. And then having a plan or have a designated pen or designated stalls for those thin sows or extremely obese sows if needed to be to get them fed back into condition is very, very important. You've got to have that plan going into it. And then one thing, it's like you think this would be simple and obvious, but make sure you shut the feeders off. Problem is you lose a sow or you move a couple sows out, they don't shut the feeders off, nobody catches it. All of a sudden the sows all are getting fat right before farrowing, right at the time where we want them lean and mean going into farrowing. We don't want them fat. Fat sows don't farrow well, and they don't milk very well either. From a health and vaccination standpoint, I think we found it was a little bit easier to lose track of sows for routine vaccinations and things like that. They're no longer in a gestation row where you can say, well, here's group 46, here's the flag where it starts, and here's the flag where it ends. It just became a little bit harder to keep track of that since they're not in those long gestation rows. Vaccinations, honestly, unless they were in the free access system where we could lock them down, they're a little bit more difficult to do. You have less restraint options, so that becomes you've got some employee safety concerns as well as concerns about getting good vaccinations and doing any damage to the sows as well. If you have a herd that has marginal foot health problems, they will probably be magnified in group housing. That's one of the concerns, right, is they've been installed so long. We've probably bred them for, born alive, gain, feed conversion. We've probably selected away from some of the things about having good structure and things like that. So if you have marginal foot health, it will be magnified in a group housing situation. One of the upshots for us, though, is we found it much easier to monitor for diseases. We use oral fluids, which is essentially hanging a rope, letting the pigs chew on it, taking that saliva and running it for different disease processes, which is really hard to do in individual sows because you got to try to hang a rope in front of every sow. But in a group situation, it allowed us to start looking, well, do we really have PRRS circulating out here, or PED, or Seneca Valley virus, or whatever? So that was kind of the upshot, is felt like we could do more monitoring of the sows rather than just looking at their piglets. So kind of in summary, moving to group housing, takes a different mindset than what we've grown up in. So you just need to make sure that you're going to match your husbandry skills to the system that's going to allow you to be most successful. Make sure you give them enough square feet. You kind of felt like anything between, I'd probably say 16 to 25 square feet was probably going to be enough. Like we said, the husbandry skills need to be increased, and just need to make sure you have a plan for thin or fall behind animals to feed them and treat them properly.